People talk about emotional intimacy like it's the highest form of love, like once you reach it, you've won. Like it's the final level where pain disappears and connection becomes pure. They tell you that being emotionally naked with someone is the goal, the cure, the thing that finally makes relationships feel real. But nobody warns you about what happens when emotional intimacy stops being a bridge and starts becoming a cage. Because emotional intimacy doesn't just bring you closer to someone, it gives them access. Access to your fears, your soft spots, your unhealed wounds. The parts of you that never learned how to protect themselves. And once someone has that access, even unintentionally, they can hurt you in ways no stranger ever could. At first, it feels beautiful. You stay up late talking about childhood memories you've never said out loud. You confess insecurities you usually hide behind jokes. You feel seen, not for who you pretend to be, but for who you actually are when no one's watching. There's relief in that. A kind of emotional exhale. Like you've been holding your breath your entire life and finally someone lets you breathe. And that's when the shift happens. Because once someone knows you deeply, they don't just see your strengths, they see your patterns. They learn what makes you anxious. They learn what scares you. They learn what you need in order to feel safe. And without meaning to, the power dynamic changes. Suddenly, the person who knows you best also becomes the person who can destabilize you the fastest. The dark side of emotional intimacy begins when your sense of emotional safety becomes dependent on one person. You stop regulating your emotions on your own. Their tone affects your mood. Their silence feels louder than any argument. Their approval becomes reassurance. Their distance becomes panic. You tell yourself it's love, but deep down, something else is happening. You're outsourcing your emotional stability. And the scariest part is, you don't even notice when it starts. It happens slowly. You begin to check your phone more often. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze pauses, messages, facial expressions. Not because you're insecure by nature, but because when someone becomes your emotional anchor, any shift feels like a threat. When intimacy is deep, even small changes feel massive. Emotional closeness makes you vulnerable. But vulnerability without boundaries turns into emotional exposure. And emotional exposure without balance turns into emotional dependence. That's where intimacy becomes dangerous. Because when you need someone too much, you stop being honest. You start filtering your truth. You avoid conflict. You swallow discomfort. You convince yourself that silence is peace. You don't say what hurts you because you're afraid that if you do, they'll pull away. And losing them doesn't just mean losing a relationship. It feels like losing yourself. This is how people slowly disappear inside emotionally intimate relationships. You stop expressing anger because you don't want to upset them. You stop setting boundaries because you don't want to seem difficult. You start accepting things you never would have tolerated before, all in the name of understanding and connection. But real intimacy was never meant to require self-erasure. The darker truth is this: emotional intimacy amplifies everything. Love feels deeper, yes, but so does pain. Rejection hits harder. Neglect feels sharper. Betrayal cuts cleaner. When someone who knows your inner world hurts you, it doesn't just hurt, it dismantles you. And often the person hurting you isn't doing it intentionally. They might not even realize the weight of their words or actions. But impact doesn't require intent. When someone knows your emotional history, they know where your wounds are. Even small missteps can reopen scars you thought were healed. That's why emotionally intimate breakups don't just feel like heartbreak, they feel like identity loss. You don't just miss the person. You miss the version of yourself that existed with them, the version that felt understood, the version that felt safe enough to be open. When that connection ends, it leaves behind a silence that feels unbearable. Suddenly, there's no one to send that thought to. No one who understands that reference. No one who knows why that memory still hurts. And you're left holding everything you once shared. The dark side of emotional intimacy is that it creates emotional echoes. Long after someone is gone, their presence lingers in your reactions. You still hear their voice in your head. You still anticipate their responses. You still feel their absence in moments when you want to be understood, and sometimes that intimacy becomes a weapon. In unhealthy dynamics, emotional closeness can turn into control. Someone might use your vulnerabilities against you in arguments. They might dismiss your feelings because they know how deeply it affects you. They might withdraw affection to regain power. Knowing silence hurts you more than words ever could. This is emotional intimacy without emotional responsibility. Because true intimacy isn't just about knowing someone deeply, it's about caring for what you know. When that care is missing, intimacy becomes manipulation disguised as closeness. You tell yourself, "They know me so well," without realizing that knowledge is being used to shape your behavior. You adjust yourself to avoid conflict. You perform emotional labor to keep the connection alive. You become hyper-aware of their needs while neglecting your own, and eventually love starts to feel exhausting. Another shadow of emotional intimacy is emotional enmeshment. When two people become so intertwined that there's no clear emotional boundary between them, their pain becomes your pain. Their moods dictate your energy. Their struggles feel like your responsibility to fix. You stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "What do they need right now?" And while empathy is beautiful, self-abandonment is not. The truth no one tells you is that emotional intimacy requires emotional independence to survive. Without it, intimacy collapses into pressure. One person becomes the emotional container for two lives. And that weight eventually cracks the relationship or the individual carrying it. That's why some of the deepest connections also end in the most painful ways. Not because intimacy was wrong, but because it was unbalanced. One person needed the connection more. One person invested more emotionally. One person made the relationship their emotional home. And homes hurt the most when they fall apart. The dark side of emotional intimacy isn't that it exists. It's that we romanticize it without teaching people how to hold it safely. We glorify "tell me everything" without teaching boundaries. We praise vulnerability without teaching self-protection. We chase closeness without understanding the responsibility it demands. Real emotional intimacy doesn't mean giving someone access to everything at once. It doesn't mean merging identities. It doesn't mean needing someone to feel whole. It means choosing closeness while still standing on your own emotional ground. Because the healthiest intimacy isn't the one that makes you feel incomplete without someone. It's the one that enhances your life without replacing it. The moment emotional intimacy starts costing you your voice, your boundaries, your peace, or your sense of self, that's not connection anymore. That's attachment trying to pass as love. And love, real love, should never require you to disappear. So if you find yourself feeling smaller, quieter, or more anxious the closer you get to someone, pay attention. Intimacy should make you feel safer, not more afraid. It should make you feel stronger, not dependent. It should allow you to be honest, not careful. Because emotional intimacy is powerful. And like anything powerful, it can heal or it can destroy depending on how it's held. And the darkest truth of all is this: the same closeness that makes love feel magical is the same closeness that makes loss feel unbearable. That's the price of depth. And the question isn't whether emotional intimacy is worth it. The question is whether you're building it on wholeness or on need, because one leads to connection and the other leads to collapse.